Hello and welcome to Conversations with the Voice of Reason. I'm your host, Benjamin Boyce, and today's conversant is returning guest Jay Burden of The Jay Burden Show. He interviews a lot of the premier intellectuals on the electronic or e-right or dissident right, and he has thoughts of his own, which we explore in depth in this conversation. You can find links to his work down there in the description, as well as links to support this channel. Without further ado, here is Jay Burden. What does it feel like having a face now?
Yeah, honestly, it was weird at first. People got used to it pretty quickly. Uh, I think that I already held anonymity sort of loosely. There wasn't really a huge gap between who I was on the internet and who I was in real life. So, after the initial kind of rush of like, oh, it's me, I was relatively calm. And a big part of the reason I did it is, look, uh, I'd basically already been doxxed anyway. So it was sort of a very transparent fig leaf.
Did you get the Guardian treatment, or was this?
No, funny thing, no, this was, and I won't speak too much on it. This came from within. It came from inside the house, so to speak. Obviously, because it is personal, I'll avoid saying anything more on that subject. But no, actually, I've really only been featured in the press once, and that's on Right Wing Watch. Which it's funny. It was a clip from my show where I didn't talk. So they were very mad at someone I was speaking to, Joel Levin, who, I don't know particularly well. I talked to him one time for 50 minutes and thought he was a nice enough chap. But apparently it irritated them enough they clipped it. So I got mentioned there. But other than that, I'm not nearly interesting enough to get Guardian style doxing.
Yeah, no, I'm looking for. I'm nowhere on this Right Wing Watch, even though I do have a playlist, which you're going to be included in, called Right Winging It. So, but I guess they don't care about me. I don't know what does it take to get on the watch list.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've never really understood who gets marked out for being canceled. Because some of the people you see and you're like, all right, even if I don't agree with them getting canceled and their lives ruined, from their perspective, from the bounded rationality of like the extremely aggressive left, you can kind of understand it. You're like, all right, if they're going to go for someone, that guy is who I assume they'd go for. But then you have other guys like Molyneux is a great example, where he just got his life ruined for effectively no reason, as far as I can tell. Like, I'm not a big Molyneux fan. He's not my favorite guy on the internet, but he really had a tough go of it for a couple years.
Yeah, I don't know why.
No reason.
Was there a reason for the band hammer on him? And it was cross-platform. It was all of them, all at once.
Right.
I don't know if that was right at the same time or right around the same time as Alex Jones got body slammed out of the public eye. But
yeah, I mean, even with Jones, and look, I think Alex Jones is like pound for pound, probably one of the funniest people in America. I don't think he's right about much, but you got to admit, like, he's entertaining as hell.
Yeah.
It's actually funny. I was just talking
Magellan
on my show. Yeah. I was just talking on my show about Virginia politics, which is where I live. And of course, my favorite Alex Jones clip ever, which is him on Joe Rogan talking about the then governor of Virginia, who was embroiled in two scandals, both the late term abortion and also a blackface scandal. And Alex Jones doing this like Kentucky Colonel Southern accent. It's just incredibly funny. Like, I'm not gonna lie, he's a funny guy. But point is, that's a case where it's like that man was the focus of left-wing ire for the better part of a decade before he was taken out. Whereas a lot of the guys on our side of things, the internet, the less official, you don't have a company in the same way that Alex Jones does.
No.
A lot of those guys, it just seemed like someone woke up and got mad at them, and said like, all right, today you're gone. And have you spoken to Josh Moon?
Yes, just once though. Yeah, but he's the founder of Kiwi Farms.
Yeah, but the reason I bring him up is from what he was saying in his case, there basically is just one woman, I don't know how we want to say this, who decided he was a problem and
Yeah.
devoted an immense amount of time and money. And okay, you assume that's
Connections.
probably
Yeah.
not in every case, but who knows? I mean, there could have just been some guy out there who said, I don't like Stephen Molyneux, or I don't like
Mhm.
XYZ, and said, all right, you're gone. I was listening to a podcast, New Founding podcast. They're a investment group, but they do a pretty decent interview show. And they
Yeah.
had a guest speaking, and he was talking about the issue with the way that many of these social media companies are managed, where you have these sort of like data monkeys who
Mm.
get a lot of power and don't have a lot of oversight. Uh, and basically, in an instance like this, where it is one account among millions, if not billions, there's really no one checking up on those sort of administrative decisions because in most cases they're very small. And if you get an activist, particularly a trans activist, which has happened a multitude of times, I'm not just using that as a slur, uh, oftentimes they're in a position where there's no one looking over their shoulder. And that really even steps aside the recent, I, they say this is a revelation that Google was working with the Biden administration, but it wasn't really. We all kind of knew, right? We all kind of
Yeah.
knew. They're just
Yeah.
admitting it after the case.
Yeah.
So point
Yeah.
is, I have no idea why. Well, actually, I do know why people are banned, but it is completely arbitrary. Both
Mhm.
the degree to which you were banned and why they picked you one day. Like you have
Mhm.
guys like Computing Forever, who I was never an avid viewer of, but I certainly remember him being around. He got zapped, no strikes, nothing, just gone.
Hmm.
Millennial Woes, another
Yeah.
guy who you've spoken to before, he got
Yeah.
just completely
He
obliterated.
was ahead of the
I
curve.
mean, yeah. I mean, and that's sort of the sad thing, right? Is that the first heretic always gets burned.
Mm.
Very often those people who are ahead of the curve suffer much more than the early adopters. The sort of the first 1% has a much worse deal of it than the next 2 or 3. Like still people who are ahead of the curve, but much less so. And that's what I noticed when we're talking to, our sort of, because I would say you are a half to a full generation of internet time older than I am, right? You started in the sort of obviously with the Evergreen scandal in the kind of,
Oh, yeah.
but to say like, if you look at our predecessors, right? Like the early adopters of the internet, those were the real trailblazers. And many of them, especially if they were interested in edgy ideas, and I mean genuinely edgy ideas, suffered for it in a way that thankfully you and I have not had to.
Well, it depends on what we're talking about. If we're talking like social media, YouTube era, when YouTube began to go one step beyond just viral memes into longer form content and started to acquire status via audience. And I think that the first real explosion of the awareness of the power of the tool of YouTube was probably Gamergate, for anything serious, for anything political. And Gamergate, for one reason or another, a beautiful reason, and it kind of makes sense because these people, the gamers, devoted a lot of their attention, time, and energy to virtual worlds and discussing and really figuring out how these different systems operate in this virtual reality. And so they had, and not just the games, but the forums around it, and going from just all these random forums into the public square of Twitter. Not so much Facebook, because Facebook is oddly run. I don't know what they're trying to do or why, but that's just a boomer slop feed. But
I can offer a little bit of insight into Facebook. It's kind of an interesting thing.
It's weird because they shitified their platform to a certain extent, and then they stopped. It just became like really shitty, and then it didn't get any shittier. It's just shitty. But I don't use it that often.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't either. I've just had to use it occasionally for work. So Facebook is heavily monetized, but they recently got in trouble, and I don't have the citation out in front of me. You can look this up and find it. They recently got busted for massively juicing their own metrics, basically lying about how much of Facebook was legitimate traffic. And so that tanked effectively the advertising rate on Facebook. both how much you as a business would pay to Meta. Well, and also if you're someone making content, you're no longer making as much on advertisements. So it really hurt the platform. And you have sort of two trends at once, which is the domestic Facebook user base is aging out. It is older people, just due to the simple facts of life. The longer you wait, the less old people there are around, in a given generation. And so they've been pushing heavily into developing markets, sub-Saharan Africa, the subcontinent. And okay, sure, that's fine. But again, if you are a Western person, the needs of that market are very different to yours. You're looking for different things. And so, yeah, to your point, like Facebook is a very weird platform. I don't pretend to understand it, but those are part of the reasons why. Going back to your point about Gamergate, obviously Gamergate was hugely impactful. And I think that, and forgive me if I'm wrong in this, it's almost like the sort of initial like jab before the cross that was Gamergate was the kind of tail end of the new atheist movement, the theist debates. We saw some of that. And in many cases, those figures carried over. I think of people like, obviously, The Amazing Atheist and Armored Skeptic, people who were sort of before my time. I was aware of them, but they weren't really in my, in my feed, so to speak. And obviously that didn't seem to be particularly important at the time. It was, nerds having discussions on the internet. Yeah. But in much the same way that, Obama and then Trump realized the power of social media and memes. It's like, all of a sudden the ability to share long form content, both video and audio, was incredibly powerful. I think that perhaps, and maybe this is too tinfoil hat, but one of the ideas I've been wondering about is if the sort of 2020 to 2024 experiment, that sort of extreme social and ideological oppression we were talking about of, kicking people off and banning people, was an attempt to put the genie back in the bottle, to basically say, can we stick our thumb, over the hose and shut off the water and make sure that dissent is managed. That was unsuccessful. And part of me wonders if the new strategy, when you talk about, the way in which places like Facebook or X, certainly TikTok, I'm not on it, but from what I've seen, have been sort of inundated with the exact opposite, which is a surplus of complete nonsense narratives. And part of me wonders if in the smoky boardroom, the conclusion has been, well, we can't control it. So how about we just effectively drown people in constant narrative, everything all at once. I can't prove that. This is the definition of conjecture, but it is one of the things I've been thinking about, because I've noticed that it seems like there's so much slop, just either AI generated or might as well be AI generated content on anything, that it's very difficult to find any useful information. And look, it might be purely market forces. It might simply be that you can make a lot of content, and even at a decreased amount of human viewership, if it costs you nothing to make, people are going to pursue that, right? Drive it down to its, till you're not making any profit whatsoever. But I don't know. Maybe I'm, like I said, too tinfoil hat, but it is something I have considered, that there is almost a utility in promoting that.
When did you start your platform, your show?
2022, I think. Maybe.
Oh, nice. So 3 years.
I should know this. Yes.
2022. And what prompted you to do that? Was it a lark?
Pretty much. Honestly, it was, and I'm trying to find the exact date. I don't know if I can. But probably, well, actually not probably. What exactly it was is, at the time I was finishing up college, due to a clerical error. Effectively, I had been, when I transferred schools, my whole first semester didn't follow me. And so even though I'd taken the courses and they were able to get them done, there were a few things that I needed to finish before I could get my degree. And so I was in this kind of uncomfortable state of all my friends, my fiance had graduated. I wasn't really a full-time student, but there were a few things I needed to get done. So I was driving back and forth constantly between the school I graduated from and the city where my friends were living. And at the time, there was a Discord group called Basket Weavers, actually, who, funnily enough, is putting on they're putting on an event in the Pacific Northwest that I will be attending, and you may or may not be. But
I
at the
am
time,
planning to. It's November 8th and 9th if you can find it.
yeah. So point is, but at the time, it was just an open Discord server for talking with dissidents. Effectively, you could say, "Hey, I'm in this area. Does anyone want to meet up for a beer?"
Mm-hmm.
And a friend who I have gone on to have a number of conversations with, Paul Fahrenheit, he happened to be at college, halfway in between where I was coming from, where I was going. We got a beer and that was the plan. Had a 4-hour argument / discussion.
Oh,
And really just like,
did you come to blows?
Not quite. I mean, who knows? We still might. But in all seriousness, it was a very contentious but productive conversation. And the conclusion of that was, and I can't remember if he said it or I'm putting these words in his mouth. He's like, "Hey man, like you should do something with that. Like there's something there." And I'd been thinking for a while. I was interested in ideas, grew up in kind of a dissident space. And so was constantly reading, was constantly listening to different perspectives. And I sort of did an analysis of like, okay, well, what am I good at? What is there a dearth of? What is there not enough of in this space? Mm-hmm. And at first I was like, oh, maybe I'll be a writer. And I do write, but I'm not an incredible writer. I consider myself serviceable. And so, I mean, do we need another serviceable writer? Probably not. Do we need a video essayist? And I was like, no, honestly, Dave has said everything I would want to say better. And so it came down to, well, I guess I'll be an interview host. I like talking to people. As I'm sure you've noticed, it's fun to do. You can't really just find people you're interested in on the internet who you've never met and say, hey, can you talk to me on the phone for an hour? But if you record it, you basically can.
Yeah.
And so that was the genesis of it, was a little bit of outside pushing, but also a genuine interest in what I saw as one of the few spaces where discourse was happening. One of the few spaces where, at a time when culture was very much controlled, this was the kind of the height of the Biden years, shortly after I didn't know if I was going to be able to get a job. One of the things that, and it didn't last very long, but as I was wrapping up school, this was obviously before, there was this whole period of time where no one knew if you didn't get, what would the result of your refusal to take a certain medicine would be. I'll be delicate for the sake of YouTube, but I didn't. I was morally comfortable in that, but I was very aware of the fact that this might mean I don't get my degree. This might mean that I won't be able to work at a company above, I believe it was 100 or 500 people. Either way, a significant reduction in expected economic status. And that sort of overwhelming feeling of sort of external social pressure of you can't say anything. We are looking for the outsider to punish them. And that was a very constrained point in time. It wasn't universal before, after, or even during, if you knew where to look. Mm-hmm. But when I found a space that was within bounds, free and open, it's like, oh, you can talk here. That was incredibly intoxicating. That was I mean, it was a breath of fresh air. It was a realization that, oh, we can still do this thing that humans have done, that particularly people interested in ideas have done, which is sort of bandy them about. And further from that, I think there's another part of it, which is, are you familiar with the sort of literal meaning of the term apocalypse?
Crisis is a turning, unveiling.
Exactly. And there was a way which, COVID, or even what we've seen now with the assassination of Kirk, was sort of an apocalypse, that things which were always true were made known. And for many people, myself included, during COVID, we saw, hey, look, many facets of life as it was presented to you were incorrect. In a literal sense, we can see the medical establishment was not as presented to us. Similarly, government was not as it was presented to us. Things didn't work like they were supposed to in high school civics class. And so when you combine that general realization that, wait a minute, things aren't as they seem, that has been made clear to me, but I can't talk about it, and I want to talk about it, Where are the people who were talking about it? It's a very long-winded way to say, I started a show because I was interested in ideas, felt like I couldn't discuss them. And to our point about both early adopters and why I've put my face along with my work product, it's that I think that this circle of the internet is talking about and identifying very real issues ahead of the curve. And if you believe that, if you say, look, like this is something special and real and legitimate, well, one, put your money where your mouth is. If you think this is so great, why are you hiding your face? And fair enough. It was something often levied at me. And after a while, I sort of internalized it and said like, okay, then, right, let's do it. Mm-hmm. Genuinely, it's like, well, I do believe this is important. So yeah, all right, fair enough. I'm going to stand by it. And also, right, it's if we are ahead of the curve, if these ideas have a social utility, if there is a potential profit associated with them, if you can imagine it like that, like there's an information advantage. Well, there's an incentive for other people to pick up on it, right? If you have an idea which more accurately explains the world, that can lead to better results. Mm-hmm. Well, once that has been borne out, there will naturally be wider adoption. Now, look, wider adoption doesn't mean we get 50+1%, and kind of turn the world into based world. I don't necessarily see that happening, but it'd be fun for it too. But to say, look, if you're interested in making ideas your life and you think you're like, hey, look, I think I found a vein of gold. I think I found something that's worth it, that was worth the, and look, I'm a young man. I'm not trying to say I spent my whole life looking for it. I mean, I guess proportionally I have. It's been a lot of time searching for something that was worth the effort. It's like, well, okay, like, it's like the biblical parable. Like, if you have buried treasure in a field, why wouldn't you sell everything you have to buy it? Because it's worth more. And look, that may be an overly dramatic way to say, to talk about kind of burning the ships and, being a professional podcaster. But yeah, that's how I justify it.
You said it's important. Why is it important? What is so important about what you're engaged in?
Sure. So this basically comes down to, well, what is the purpose of human life? People like Peterson very accurately realized that we are in a crisis of meaning, that the traditional, and by traditional, I don't mean the received wisdom of what you are to do with your life, which is to sort of maximize your personal happiness, to get the highest number of pleasurable neuron fires in your life, that was lacking very clearly. We see that in the way that many people are living. They have more access to mind-altering substances, more access to to sex, to food that people have had in human history, except for a very few kings and sultans, but they're miserable. Okay, so let's take that off the table. We've realized that simple kind of utilitarian pleasure maxing is not good for most people. Well, then the question is, well, okay, what have people traditionally justified their existence with? What is the reason that people didn't kill themselves? Not to be dramatic. So you have several answers there. You can look at, I'll say, a more I don't want to say irreligious. What's the word I'm looking for? A more secular version of that. And we can look at someone like Aristotle. What is a life well lived? And he describes this in Nicomachean Ethics when he's talking about sort of the beautiful death. Like, what is the death you can have? And obviously you're not happy because you're dying, but you can say this is a life well lived. And he describes, a wealthy man dying, surrounded by his sons and loving family. Right? He has done well. He has created abundance for others. He's taken on responsibilities for his family, for those underneath him socially. And now, at the moment of his death, he's surrounded by people who love him and respect him. Okay, fair enough. Well, let's take those two end states, which is, dying in your goon cave and dying as Aristotle's good man. You're like, okay, that's a gulf of difference there. And obviously, you may or may not achieve either, kind of maximal end. You might not be a Greek aristocrat, or you might not be, a guy, who dies in his mom's basement, horribly addicted to, degenerate pornography and kratom or whatever people do nowadays. But point is, we can say qualitatively there's a difference one between the other, and that is conceptual, right? That is an idea of what is the purpose of your life. Now, similarly, if we take this to, a religious level, and I realize not the entire audience is religious. I don't want to be seen as a Bible thumper, but it is a relevant part of this analysis. As I'm sure you've noticed, religion is sort of in the air, regardless of your specific opinions on it. But it's to say, well, okay, let's take that another level. And it's like, well, when we look at something like the Westminster Catechism, which I realize is specific to one kind of branch of Protestantism, but it is well written at the very least. And it's like, well, what is man's chief end? Well, man's chief end is to glorify God, right? Your end is not to maximize the amount of pleasure you experience in your life, but it is to become Christian, right? The etymology of that, to become like Christ, or to become a little Christ, to imitate him. And this is an idea that you see throughout history. Again, that you serve your end, you become great through imitation. One of my favorite writers, Thomas Carlyle, in Heroes, Hero Worship, and the Heroic in History, I believe is the book. Incredibly wordy title. But he has this great phrase, hero worship is the essence of civilization, where he says, effectively, great men become great by finding someone else and saying, I want to be like that.
Yeah.
So you have Robert E. Lee looking at George Washington saying, I want to be like that, and feeling like he had failed. He didn't get to it. Whereas those who came after him said, okay, that was a good man. I want to embody his virtues. And so when we say these ideas matter, there is a very kind of limited sense in that it matters to maybe win an argument, or it matters because it is better to have the correct view of some historical matter. But in a real sense, if we understand that ideas do have consequences, as Richard Weaver told us, that ideas, the way you worship, the way you direct your attention, right, kind of mixing a religious and a secular metaphor again, produces very real changes in your life and changes in society. So for instance, look at the queer movement. And queer, again, I'm not using as a slur here. I'm trying to describe that group of people, queer theorists, the kind of bashback-esque types. Well, what is that? That is a certain form of egalitarianism, sort of taken to its ultimate extreme. The idea that, well, we need to sort of revolt against every structure, that gay marriage is not the goal. The goal is the abolition of marriage, to completely destroy that. And you might say, well, that makes logical sense, but let's step back. How do those people live? Are there extreme queer activists who are living fulfilled lives? Maybe. I don't know if I've seen any. I don't know if I've met any. The ones that I do see, on average, seem to live largely immiserated lives. And I don't say that to dunk on them. I don't say that to revel in it. But it seems very clear that the way that we conduct ourselves produces dramatically different outcomes, right? That taken over the course of an entire life produces very different trajectory. And especially when we consider that we've been speaking exclusively on an individual level. We've been speaking exclusively in sort of the terms of one man, one woman's life. But also, that echoes through a civilization. So for instance, let's compare sort of a classical version of this idea to a modern one. And I mean like capital M modern, right? So sort of before what we are now. So, okay, let's say you have 2 or 3 generations of Aristotelian great men, right? Guys who, had many sons, helped them get started in life, were virtuous men, and then died in their beds, surrounded by a great household. Well, what does that society look like 3 or 4 generations down the line? Well, to be honest, we kind of know. It's what many of our societies looked like in a previous era, an era when not everyone, but it was generally accepted that you had certain obligations to those around you, your family, and also to your society. So for instance, Ben, I'm sure you've seen this in anywhere in small town America, which is the brass sculpture in the center of town just to some guy, right? Maybe a local industrialist, a local doctor. My town has one. It is to a local doctor. And this is a guy who is incredibly well educated, incredibly wealthy. And he went to the poorest part of town and no charge, set up a free clinic, died in poverty. But he wasn't literally rewarded. I assume he had more money than some, but he wasted a great deal of his money from a purely economic perspective. But he's someone who realized that he had an obligation. And so he devoted his life to that. And he was rewarded. Society, culture gave him we could look at it as sort of a semi-eternal reward. They named an area of the city after him. They gave him a statue and said, yeah, this is the guy that is heroic. So when we go back to that concept of hero worship, people around him later say, oh, to be a good man, I can be like him. Mm-hmm. Okay. So again, that is that idea of obligation to both the people who came before you, that they've done this. So surely I must at least give it a shot. And also those that come after you, that there is something expected of me. I have my end of the bargain to hold up. Now compare that to the kind of radical hedonic selfishness that I was referring to earlier. Again, I might be speaking a little bit uncharitably, but you know what? I'm on a roll, so let's go with it. That idea that the entire point of my life is to maximize my own personal happiness. All right? Well, let's play that out past your life. How many people here, and I know it's a lot, have parents or grandparents who lived like that, who are right now out in their RVs or on their expensive cruises while their grandchildren are laboring under debt slavery for an education they thought they needed or unable to buy a house? And I'm not saying, shake down your grandparents for money, but to say, even in that relatively minor instance, you can see the consequences of breaking that social chain, breaking the idea that there is an obligation to both those before and those who come after you. Very clearly, even in what might be a relatively functional relationship, you see what is lost. You see that, oh, wait, now 2 generations, 3, 4 generations have passed and, well, things aren't better. They're worse. And why was that? Well, it's because there was, to be honest, bad ideas. There was a sort of, we can imagine this almost as a religion, right? A state religion gone awry. It clearly has consequences. Ideas clearly matter. And I say this as someone who's not necessarily, doesn't really have an evangelical attitude about ideas. Doesn't necessarily say that you, Benjamin, should go around, knocking on the doors in your neighborhood and say, have you heard about my Lord and Savior, Thomas Carlyle? So something ridiculous like that. But to say that very clearly the values of a society have very real directional consequences for those people who live under it, ourselves included.
Mm-hmm. What is your audience? Do you have a handle on who they are?
Yeah, it's actually funny. My audience is generally about 10 to 15 years older than I am. It's kind of a funny detail. Mm-hmm. I'm 26. I think my average listener is 36 to 40, okay. Which is a little odd. But there are, I would say, predominantly in the kind of 25 to 35 demographic, and then tails on both sides. I'll be honest, it is 95% male. I do get occasional letters from very nice soccer moms.
Has the face reveal helped you with the women folk?
I don't know. As a married man, I think it's good that I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah. I'm wondering because the assassination of Charlie Kirk will go the way that these events go. But in response to it, we are not seeing white riot or conservative riot. I don't know if there's a revival in the works, but his martyrdom is undeniable. And the heroism of him, which is just kind of a trip, because there's all of a sudden there's all these clips of him all over, and there were always a whole bunch of clips of him all over, but in his death, he is reverberating who he is and the work that he was doing is reverberating with maximum intensity. I don't know if I've seen anybody's life do this. When Michael Jackson died, Google broke, so that was a pretty big deal. And there's been when Steve Jobs died, I guess it was something. There was some sort of impact that his death had, but with Charlie having been uploaded so much into the machine, and now having such just a gift, it's hard for me to think of him as dead. And when I think of him as dead, it's painful in this way that I've spoken about, because it's kind of surprising how impactful his murder was, but he just seems almost more alive. And it's interesting to see like the more based aspects of him kind of come out, the things that he was actually going for, and the way he dressed it up is like, I'm just going to debate, but he actually understood power. He understood the things that I came across when I began to, talk to Dave and start reading Yarvin and seeing, Carlyle and Burnham and these critiques of liberalism on a variety of different levels: economic, philosophical, spiritual, and, on the moral level or the values level. And you could see that Charlie did understand what was happening. And it's really hard to see what's happening because, there's political leftist violence and it's stochastic. It comes out of nowhere. There's just these random shooters on these random roofs, and there's a bunch of rhetoric. We understand the machine, and we understand the machine's goons, and they're not in their caves. They're out there on the rooftops, from mom's basement to the local college rooftop kind of trajectory. So I'm wondering if you have any thoughts or kind of a vibe check on the impact that assassination will have in galvanizing the dissidents, or in proving the ideas around power and politics that have been kind of the treasure trove that the dissidents have been kind of sitting on and polishing and dealing in.
Yeah, so there are several things there. I think first we have to say that I think we need to understand that you and I, our audience, are not normal people. We're jaded when we talk about ideas. We're much more used to the kind of turn and churn of, ideas going back and forth. Mm-hmm. And so for a lot of us, I think we thought of Charlie Kirk as being sort of passé and behind the curve. Like, he's the college young Republican. And many people, myself included, spoke kind of dismissively of him, right? He seems like a nice guy, but he's behind the times. I think, one, we were probably a little bit overly dismissive of him, but also because of that, I don't think we realized the broader cultural impact he had, how popular he was.
Yeah,
exactly. Outside of the sort of people who get really worked up about, Victorian British writers, outside of nerds, basically.
Scottish.
Sorry.
Carl.
But in all seriousness, I think that it's incredibly impactful for a couple reasons, which is one, again, when we talk about ideas having consequences, the sort of Radio Rwanda style, oblique and explicit, two different categories, calls for violence for literally the last decade and a half, right? Since really the emergence of Trump as a political force. I think in that same sense of an apocalypse being laid bare, we saw that, that leads to real world violence. That if you call for first, punching Nazis, then you clarify that, wait, not just Richard Spencer's a Nazi, but basically everyone to the right of some unspecified point, Joe Rogan, Charlie Kirk, pretty much everyone is a Nazi. Mm-hmm. and you can punch them, but also Nazis are an existential threat to our democracy, an existential threat to you. And well, what is an existential threat? It's sort of a tautology. It's a threat to your existence. And what is justified when someone's threatening your existence? Well, lethal force. That logic wasn't particularly apparent. I mean, we'd all talked about the fact that it was going to happen sooner or later, that if you keep calling implicitly or explicitly for violence, for repercussions, for consequences, the FAFO kind of stuff, you'd see someone was going to take them up on it. Well, that was scary. Wait a minute, the politics has turned hot. This isn't just my obnoxious blue-haired niece at Thanksgiving. They want to kill Nazis. And wait, I'm a Nazi, quote unquote. I wrote a piece where I said this, that my first thought was, wait, really, Charlie Kirk? Because he didn't seem to me that radical. Charlie Kirk has the same politics as my grandma. And well, wait, if Charlie Kirk is an existential threat to democracy, if he's a Nazi, if he can be shot, well, does that mean that they'd shoot my grandma? That they'd shoot these kind of normal Americans who look at Charlie Kirk and say, he's just like me? Well, that's incredibly disturbing, because it takes politics from even a pretty nasty back and forth to, wait a minute, you'd kill me. And okay, maybe that guy was just nuts. And if the reaction had been, oh my gosh, this is horrible, throw this guy's not one of us. And to be fair, there were leftists. I think of, Cenk Uygur, Anna Kasparian, who said, like, guys, we can't do this. This needs to stop. And more power to them for that. But from a lot of people, it was either celebration, admittedly, from like the TikTok goblins, who I don't see as being particularly influential, but okay, that's worrisome. But also a whole lot of articles came out that basically said, well, obviously we condemn this, but look at all the bad things he said. The phrase live by the sword, die by the sword kept going around.
Live by the pen, die by the sword. Or the mic.
Literally, in that case. Yeah. Where it's like normal, average, everyday Americans and people who are significantly to the right of those people realized, wait a minute, the acceptable scope of violence is much, much wider. And, well, if they're willing to kill you
and celebrate it,
then maybe you should consider that the terms of politics have changed from when you were in high school civics, that you might have to do something, as Sam Hyde said, that's kind of lame and kind of annoying, and it's kind of a blow, under the belt. It's kind of a cheap shot. But if they want to kill you, you might have to do something like that. You might have to cancel Jimmy Kimmel. You might have to get, some massage therapist from Akron, Ohio fired. And look, I don't want to live in a society like that. I'd really like to live in a culture where, sure, there's politics, but the temperature's lower. It's confined to the political realm. You remember, I'm sure, women of a previous era getting very, very upset if you brought up sex, politics, or religion at the dinner table. It simply wasn't done. It was pushed out of polite society. I'd like to live like that. But we don't really have that option at the moment. They decided, whoever they is, that this was a shooting war, that this was the consequences for opposing certain ideas and engaging with politics in a very liberal manner, engaging in the marketplace of ideas, saying, you know what, I believe my ideas are right, so let's talk it out. Let's have a discussion. But the consequences for doing exactly what you were supposed to do, the way you were supposed to pursue change, is to be shot live on television and to have everyone gloat about it. Not everyone, but have a lot of people gloat about it. And that's a very sobering realization. So that's big. Now, when I say that the reaction you and our circle had, is not the reaction everyone had, that was poorly worded, but you know what I mean. One of the things I've been thinking about a lot is the incredible religious emotion I've seen. And I'll mention two figures. Sam Hyde, comedian, I've already mentioned him once, infamously sardonic, ironic, difficult to pin down, say crazy things, mutually contradictory all the time. It's kind of his bit. Well, the special he did, the episode 10 of his show, about both the murder of Charlie Kirk and this poor Ukrainian woman, Irina, he breaks down crying. like genuinely is choked up in it in a way that, as someone who's been watching his material for years, I've never seen talking about anything. Mm-hmm. And what he was saying is, that's me. That's you. That's what they want to do. And again, speaking in this sort of very real religious tone of realizing that this sort of hatred, this sort of evil is not merely the language of a political disagreement, is not merely the sort of bad feelings that result from, you, Benjamin Boyce, are a dirty liberal, and you want to take 13% of my taxes to fund some addition to the school, and I, a God-fearing Republican, only want to take 12. It's not that. It's existential. It is real, capital P politics. That these two systems of belief, these two ideas that we've sort of broadly talked about earlier, are mutually exclusive. That there is no live and let live, at least as the game currently stands. And okay, so that's someone who's more on the fringe, is quite fringe. Okay. But
Sam?
Not necessarily in the immediate, kind of political waters we are. Another example, are you familiar, speaking of Gamergate, with Mr. Medicare? He previously was the internet aristocrat.
Yeah, I have not had a chance to listen to his latest, but apparently he's degenerating very quickly.
Yeah, so for those who don't know,
by which I mean physically, not mentally. He's a sharp cookie, very sharp, very crass, very mean-spirited, just so mean, but brilliant at the same time. And I wish, I look at somebody with that talent, and part of me understands what he's set out to do, and the other part of me is like, I know there's just this soft kitten inside of there that would just be so good to project goodness into the world, but he projects badness by dealing in badness. I have a strained relationship with him because he looks at the dark. He really looks at the dark, and he calls it what he is, and he gets down there with the pigs and he wrestles with them. God bless his soul.
Of course. So for those who aren't familiar with him, he was a foundational figure in Gamergate. And as we've said,
him, Carl, and a few others. Yeah. And
speaks as if that era is still around. All your favorite slurs, all of your favorite ways of belittling others. And I like him. I think he's funny, but I've never agreed with him politically. Again, he was very much seemed to me to be a nihilist. He made fun of Carl Benjamin, for example, endlessly for doing anything at all.
For being serious, for taking himself seriously.
Exactly. And unfortunately, he seems to have just devastating terminal cancer. He hasn't said exactly what, but he's been bad off for a long time. And throughout it, he is a doomed man. He doesn't have long on this world. That facade has never cracked. He's still stayed his sardonic, sarcastic self. Yeah. Well, he does a stream, which you can find on mirror sites. He deletes everything he does.
Yeah.
Talking about the assassination. And again, he is breaking down in tears. He's saying, I was the son or the grandson of a Lutheran minister. I've never believed in God. Even my own mortality didn't bring me to God, but the assassination of Charlie Kirk did. And to be honest, I look at his funeral, his memorial service, and I see effectively the biggest ecumenical event in American history. You have Catholics, Protestants, Stephen Miller, who's a Jew, all talking about this man in in very strong religious terms, that this is a war of belief, that this is not simply a conflict over policy, that there's something evil that needs to be opposed. And as someone who in a previous time has struggled with absolute moral claims, has struggled with saying, this is good, this is evil, especially in the context of politics. Maybe too much realism rots your brain. But I think that is very much the emotion many people are sitting in. They're saying, no, you want to kill normal, good people. You think it's funny. Again, to quote Sam Hyde, they want you dead, they want your kids, and they think it's funny.
And mutilated,
And the people who were ahead of the curve, people like you or I or our friends who have been following these things for years now, It's easy for us to get cynical, to say, oh, of course, finally you're catching up. But we've got to understand that like this needed to happen. People needed to see this. And I hate to say it, very cynical about how effective the official government response will be, just judged off of what we've seen so far.
Our government wasn't designed to be effective. But it does be effective in certain very specific things that aren't necessarily good for us. But
no, exactly. But if we're talking about the vibe shift, I think that if we can narrow it down to several points, I'd say one, it's a realization that the consequences of politics are very, very serious. That it is not simply your taxes go up or a few resolutions you don't approve of are passed. It is, from a certain perspective, existential. Either you have the sin of commission of the kind of evil left, which is some lunatic is going to blow your head off, to be blunt about it. Or the sin of omission, which is this Arena girl, that you will go about your life until some 14 times arrested lunatic cuts your throat. That is the sort of the two bounds. These are the things that will happen to you. And obviously not everyone will be murdered, but many people saw themselves in either one of those figures or in both. And so that's one, that the consequences of politics are very real. And two, I think it's something that I myself initially saw the first glimmers of during COVID, which is that evil is real. That not simply just you are mistaken, you are wrong, but a genuine desire to harm and ruin. That I don't just want you out of power, I want you to suffer. I think it's funny. I amuse myself with 4K video of your guy bleeding out. That sort of genuine evil is not just the I want to win. Is not just the I want more money than you. I want more access to power than you. But that genuine darkness of saying, it's not just enough for me to win, you must lose and you must be humiliated. I think
what in COVID did that come clear to you? What apocalypse?
Oh, I mean, look at the look at the incredible, like very, very vicious sort of cancel culture and public censure around, anti-vaxxers. The idea that not only must I take the drug, but if you don't, I'm sure you remember what we saw in Australia, right? We're going to send you to a camp, or we're going to, and this never happened, but there was I can't remember who put it out. It was some mainstream media. It might've been Bloomberg, basically asking respondents what they thought an appropriate response was to anti-vaxxers. And you have between 10 and 20% of people saying, oh, not only should they be barred from hospitals, not only should they be barred from their employment, but they should have their kids taken away. The idea that it's not merely enough for us to have something, but if you defy us, we're going to ruin your life. Mm-hmm. Similarly to what you saw happen to anti-abortion protesters during the Biden regime. It's like, we're going to go out and get you. Mm-hmm. Oh, you're 80? You stood in front of an abortion clinic? Well, guess what? The FBI is coming to your house. Like, okay, look, man, even if you really like abortion, if you're 80, is it really worth prosecuting you? Like, I'm sorry, it's not. Like, we throw you in jail for 2 years. It's a life sentence. Like, okay, it's not like you blew up a building, Mm-hmm. But to basically realize that this was not simply indifference, that this was not simply a desire to win, but there was genuine malice. There was a desire to say, I want to ruin your life. And again, you saw a very similar thing with the excesses of BLM, that it wasn't just a general rebellion against police, but all of a sudden you gave the worst people in the world tools, right? You gave them, if you could pin someone as racist, you could ruin their life. And everyone, not everyone, these sort of activists went around looking for people they could get. And I say this as someone who had friends who were canceled, people who aren't on the internet per se, but just were a little behind the times. They hadn't downloaded the newest software patch. And instead of being rebuked or told what to do, they were burned. Their life was done. They couldn't have a normal job anymore. And look, I get it. I've spoken positively about a certain form of cancel culture and spoken negatively about this. But it must be said that the canceling of Jimmy Kimmel did not exist in a vacuum. Right? It's not like the first time this has ever been done.
Oh, he's
this
back
is after,
anyways.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he lost 30% of his reach. So, okay, that's certainly a bloody nose. But point is,
yeah, but I'm sure. I mean, sure. I know a lot of people tuned in, so I wonder if he can keep the audience. But it backfires. Cancellation backfires.
100%. And I realize there's a tension there. Someone might say, "Well, why are you okay when you do it?" And well, one, it's because at a certain point, it's like this is the stage on which the game is being played. Yeah. You know, if you're playing basketball and you refuse to go for 3-pointers, you're not going to win, regardless of if you think 3-pointers are the best way to play the game or not. It's a stupid example, but one that came to mind. So that's another one, right? That genuine malice and evil is real. And thirdly, if we're looking for a third conclusion, it's that and I might be overextending this, but given the existence of true evil, there must be some good. There must be something transcendent, in the same way that if there is sort of transcendent evil, if there is an evil that is not merely motivated by, one might say, this sort of trends and forces, economic want, a desire for additional power, then there must be something opposed to that. And when I see people turning to religion, and you might think it's hokey, you might not, but many people are, people who say, no, I don't want to be like that. I don't want to be around that. I want the opposite of that. I think that is something I've noticed as well. And maybe not in our circles, but in a broader cultural sense. You look at both the actual event, right? Kirk's memorial, the speech is given, but also the people around it. The stadium is packed. There's a massive, even around the stadium, there are people, lined up. Or the fact that there have been dozens of similar memorials, right? I went to a vigil right after he was killed. Mm-hmm. It was a vigil for both, Irina and him. And it was small. It was not planned. It was not permitted. Just got some guys together. And what was interesting in that is, okay, sure, we're religious extremists already. We're the kind of people who are interested, our guys, right? Nerds, people who are this far into it. But the public reaction, the other people around us were stopping to say like, oh, thank you for doing this. Mm-hmm. They were genuinely moved by it. We had people who weren't invited, stop by, just hang out with us for a little bit. Everyone said like, oh, this is good. I'm glad someone's doing it. And to me, I think, again, that speaks to the way that Kirk's death, I've never seen anything like it before, genuinely. I mean, you mentioned, the death of Michael Jackson. I remember when that happened. And I mean, that was certainly a cultural event. They had special Michael Jackson branded Pepsi cans for a while, mm-hmm. but that was different. It was tragic, but not in the same way. Mm-hmm. Because what was revealed by that? Pop stars get old. Like, okay, that's sad, but we've known that for a long time, that mm-hmm. people, even famous people, get old and die. Sure, this may have been the most famous man since John Lennon died, but still, there was not something revealed. Where in this case, it feels as if the veil has been pulled back, that the reality of politics, the reality of the kind of nasty, maybe even spiritual nature of this struggle have been made clear to many people who might not have been paying attention. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know, that's sort of my view on it, Ben.
Mm-hmm. About a year ago, Daryl Cooper, Martyr Maid, went on Tucker Carlson, and I think Tucker enjoys getting other people in trouble. But Tucker called him, the greatest historian in America or whatever. And Daryl said a couple of things that were marginally spicy, right? I mean, Churchill's the greatest, and within the context of that. But it sparked this huge reaction from the center. The center at that point in the game switched enemies. The enemy had been the wokies from the left, and that moment, and Trump going through the gauntlet of a near assassination, receiving the mandate of heaven and winning, kind of put a kibosh on the cultural dominance of the woke left, woke classic, and the centrists, mobilized by anti-wokeness, mobilized by having an enemy that they felt particularly adept at critiquing and fighting for, because they were fighting for, I mean, the centrists, the classical liberals, are basically left of center. They got ran out of the institutions that they believe in, and the tools that they believe in, rationality and reason and proceduralism, had all been corrupted by deconstructionism, postmodernism, rapid progressivism. And so they were fighting against that. And they went from being in the institutions to being politically homeless. And they found themselves teaming up with the right and, capturing a lot of goodwill from the people who are already outside of the institution, either by way of thinking, believing, or their way of life. And when wokeness kind of took the bullet from Trump and took that bullet, you see a lot of centrists start to critique the right. And, the famous Jordan Peterson, we know when the right goes too far, but we don't know when the left goes too far. Where does the left go too far? So Martyr made the really rabid backlash against Daryl Cooper, which backlash I found weird because it was out of keeping with what he actually said. You there? Okay.
So sorry, you were saying Peterson, they know when the left has gone too far, but not the right has gone too far, but not the left.
I'm trying to get to my point and I kind of lost it, but the intellectual dark web types, the marketplace of ideas.
You were talking
types.
about the turn from that group opposing the woke left to now the pivot to viewing the right as the main threat after the interview that Daryl Cooper did on Tucker.
Yeah, so Daryl goes on Tucker, and the reaction from the IDW set, or the centrist set, was surprisingly out of step. Yeah, I know what my point is. From what Daryl said, but then they went to Daryl's Twitter, and they did the woke thing of like, we're going to look at all the tweets and take them out of context. And I mean, it's not really hard to do because he was tweeting about the Nazis. He had that famous tweet that he had taken down himself because of personal reasons, because friends thought it was distasteful. But there was a Olympics mockery, trans or queer mockery, a queering of the Last Supper at the Olympics, the Paris Olympics. And he had a picture of that, and then a picture of Hitler, Adolf, mustache man walking through Paris. And he said, and I don't know to what, it wasn't phrased as a joke, but I think I saw his humor. He said, like, this is Hitler occupying France is much more preferable to queer occupation of France, basically. But he was using rhetoric that I thought the dissident right had deployed in order to scare off normies, in order to protect discourse from corruption of a certain sort by masking themselves and Hitlerism. And it's interesting how that aesthetic of evil is perpetuating itself. People on the right are identifying with stormtroopers, right? They're identifying with Anakin Skywalker. It's really interesting. And I know that it's tongue in cheek, and it's a way to incite people's fear of the right, that they've pretended and kind of embrace that, kind of reappropriate like the N-word, the fascist word, kind of use that as a garb to gain the force of mimetic power. And and to kind of say, yeah, we're joking, but we're not really joking. Like this is kind of actually good. But when Daryl kind of got raked over the coals by the people who I think are still my team, but not really anymore, because it revealed that they want to control the realm of discourse. These comedians become podcasters, want to say which podcaster is the right podcaster to listen to. Is it Dave Smith or is it Douglas Murray? Is it people who are for Israel or people who are critical of Israel? I don't know why Israel became so important to the discourse. It's not really important right now, thankfully, because I get really tired of talking about Israel all the time. There's Juiceberg's pro and con. But I saw that Daryl had compromised his work and his message by adopting the language that the dissident right had been using around fascism to kind of push normies out, or kind of like a shit test. Can you handle these ideas? Can you handle this imagery? If you can't handle this imagery, then you can't really handle these ideas. But I really do think that the dissident right needed to, in that moment, kind of grow up a little bit and kind of reveal its power level on the level of being serious. And the vibe that I get from you is that you're very straightforward young man. You're very clear-headed. You don't seem like you are impulsive or you're particularly prone to acting on emotion. And I think that you attract the audience that you do, the older audience, because you're vibing with kind of the older 35 to 45 crowd who are like, okay, I'm kind of done with the hot-headedness because that's not how I get the results that I want. And so long-winded way of asking if the moment of Charlie Kirk's martyrdom and assassination has changed politics. The dissident right ideas around being very realistic about power have, and you can hear them echoed in Vance and in the Trump administration. If they are ready to kind of be, you said all these normies are coming and being woken up to the nature of politics in this time. I'm wondering what ideas from the dissident right are ready to be put out there and to kind of take on center stage. And one of them, of course, is the friend-enemy distinction. And one of my friends, James Lindsay, is really going hard against the friend-enemy distinction because he's thinking of it in terms of game theory that it will lead to Nazism. Like he's still of the leftist persuasion that everything that is ordered is everything that is authoritative and decisive is one step removed from either Mao or Franco, Mao or Hitler. That's not the case. And he might have a good point about the right going too far. But I don't think the right is going to act on, I think the right is going to act on principle, but the ideas that underlie it need to be aired out and shown to a wider audience to kind of show people what time it is. So I'm wondering what you think, like the core ideas from the DR, from the dissident right that you've been embroiled in for a long time and chewing on for a long time are ready to be packaged and sold to normies.
Yeah, so there are several things there. First of all, the dissident right is infamously fractious and disorganized.
Yeah, it's
like
so
all different
there's so
tribes.
many different. Yeah.
Yeah, and so even when we talk about the relationship,
friend-enemy distinction, there's a lot of enemies.
When we talk about the relationship to the Third Reich, you run the gamut. Like there were people who are like, yeah, those are my guys. Mm-hmm. To quote Sam Hyde again, Hitler, I'm your top guy, and mean it seriously. Mm-hmm. That's exists. And I think that one of the things that defines that group, broadly speaking, is saying, look, we don't view that as disqualifying you from all polite conversation whatsoever. So, for instance, I'm not a National Socialist. I'm not really a fan of Hitler per se. I'm not really a modernist. Yeah, but, well, I mean that genuinely. Like, he's not my cup of tea. But my friend Thomas, he's really into that. And it's like, okay, I disagree with him on that. There are many things we agree on, but To me, I don't view that as being disqualifying for your relationship in polite society. In the same way that I think that kind of using racial slurs and being rude to people of other groups is distasteful, but there are many of my mutuals, people I've had on my show, who say things like that. And they might be joking, they might not, but it's not the sort of divining rod. It's not the thing, the friend enemy distinction. And so I think that's part of it, is taking a different moral stance towards these issues and saying, look, like, they may be right, they may be wrong. And in this case, we found two issues where I agree with the general mainstream opinion that both of these things are morally wrong or incorrect, but they are not the sort of the ultimate sin in human existence. That is not the defining characteristic of human existence. So I think that's part of it. Right? There's a fundamentally different moral standard applied to others. So to your point about growing up, I think that is something that is necessary. We're seeing the transition from a very fringe movement, one where you sort of have this grab bag of both eccentric characters, right? Guys who are on the fringes for any number of reasons. Some of them are there because they have especially dangerous ideas. They have ideas that, wow, he's brilliant, but he's too far out there. We can't have him in a normal university. But you also have, to be blunt, social malcontents, people who would be on the fringes in any society. And there will, and I would say there is currently sort of a sorting process. Some ideas, some people are getting left behind, others are not. But if we can say, like, what are the main contributions from the dissident right? I think that there are a couple. One, first and foremost, as you've correctly identified it, is political realism. Right? The realpolitik nature of how groups operate in relation to one another. The mainstreaming of Schmitt is a great example. This is something that guys like Paul Gottfried were 40 years ahead of the curve on, saying, hey, this guy describes how humans work. He is not saying this is how we should live, but much like Machiavelli, he's saying, hey, if we study people, we can generally make a rule for how they tend to operate. Okay, so political realism is one. Now, let's be honest, that also extends to geopolitical realism. Not really my circuit, I'll be honest, I don't know anything about international relations, but you also see, and this, as much as I hate to talk about it, does relate to conversations about Israel, but saying, look, in the same way that we must look at domestic politics in a realistic way, we should apply that same lens to foreign affairs. So you've seen the rise of guys like, Judge Napolitano, guys like John Mearsheimer saying, hey, look, we need to go about running the empire differently. So that's another kind of extension of political realism. I think another one is, and I realize that, let's go with the most neutral framing of the reality of human biodiversity, that men and women are fundamentally different in a way much more than merely, a couple of physical expressions. And also different populations have real differences. People take that in a variety of different ways, but most everyone agrees that on average, using the laws of large numbers, we can make different predictions about different groups, whether that is as gross as men versus women, right? Quite possibly the two biggest groups in the human species, or even down to the level of like, oh, well, if we study XYZ, we can say people from this continent tend to be taller, faster, smarter, more athletic than that continent, or vice versa, right? Pick your groups. So that's another one. Like the genuine realization there are differences between human groups. I think also, if we really want to dig down to it, fundamentally is the rejection of equality, to be honest. The rejection that the idea, the telos, the end goal of society is for people to be the same, or people to have the same thing. Again, take in any different chapter of dissident right, the far right, whatever you want to call it, rejects that in a different way, but that is a commonly assumed premise. Groups are different and cannot and should not be forced to being the same. That's another one. As regards America and as regards ideas that have been mainstreamed, I think one of the biggest ones is that, and this makes people uncomfortable, but it's that culture and a people are linked. One of the big disagreements you see between the dissident right and the kind of Joel Berry and James Lindsay types is the idea that there is a ethnic group called Americans. There is an ethnic group called the English, the Germans, the Swiss, pick your poison. And that group should act in its own best interest. That you should be able to say, as the kind of catchy EDM song from last summer, Germany for the Germans, or you should be able to say England for the English. And that is a thing that can be defined. And again, that is a rejection of equality. It is an acceptance of, we could say, like prejudice or exclusion, saying, I prefer this to that. And I think that that's another one. This is something that we obviously understand in more personal sense. That when you're saying, well, I love my wife, you're not saying I hate all other women, but you're saying I have a extra bond or an extra responsibility to that one person or to that one group. And so again, I think that that's another kind of commonly accepted one. There are others that I think are less universally held by the dissident right TM. They're not as universally accepted premises. But I think one of them that you've seen massively mainstreamed is the idea that if a group who makes up a country exists and should continue to exist, and the country would change if a different group was brought in to replace them. I realize replace is a sketchy word when we talk about this, but America would be different if every American was replaced with a Russian, or every American was placed with a Turk. Well, if that's true, and that's a premise that I see widely mainstreamed, well, then we ought to promote babies being born. We ought to care about the long-term health of a population group. So for instance, you see Musk talking about this all the time. There might be a baby crash. Disagree with him or not, but either way, right? That is a deeply subversive premise compared to our previous existing ruling ideology, right? The idea that the purpose of your life is to enjoy it versus the idea that, well, yeah, sure, but if none of us have kids, this ceases to exist. This culture, this sort of, as you would say, like cultural, like animal, right? This entity dies if its cells don't reproduce. So that's another one. And also, I think a big thing that has jumped from the dissident right to the mainstream, particularly, the mainstream right, is a full and total rejection of the left's moral standing. Basically of saying, you don't get to define if I am a moral actor or not. So going back to the kind of edgy, National Socialism stuff. Okay, you can look at that and say, all right, that's kind of cringe. I don't like that. But what you've got to understand is happening there is saying, I don't care that I am associating myself with everything that you hate. Doesn't matter to me. Does not affect me. And okay, JD Vance isn't coming out with a Totenkopf on his head. He's throwing up the SS bolts or anything. But when he says, I don't give a shit, as he said multiple times, like I do not care what you think about what I am doing. Yeah. That moral rejection of saying you don't get to decide if what I'm doing is right or wrong. I think that attitude has jumped over. And a large part of why I think that idea has jumped over is that many in the dissident right saw where the rhetoric coming from the left would lead. They saw where that sort of malice would end up with. And it wouldn't end up with just them making fun of you or them disliking you, talking behind your back. It would end with normal white Christian conservative men being shot, right? Bled out in front of their wife and kids. And so if you've assumed that premise, if you said, you're ultimately okay with killing me, why do I care if you think I'm being mean or not? Why do I care? Because we have set ourselves up in opposition. And actually, this is one of the things that I think that the group of people you were talking about earlier, right? The centrists, the IDW, whatever, I think it's something that they get wrong, is that they look at the woke left and they see how they go about politics. And they say that mode of enmity, of total war, that is woke. And so anyone who adopts that framing is similarly woke. So this is where you get the in my mind, nonsensical concept of the woke right. They are playing the game the same way. The problem is that is simply how degenerated politics are played. Like when the system starts to fall apart, that's what happens. The stakes get higher. People start to realize that this is existential and the knives come out. And merely realizing that the knives are coming out and acting accordingly, well, doesn't make you woke, because then basically everyone is woke, and woke means absolutely nothing.
I don't know. I don't know the alternative to that. That's what I'm waiting for. The alternative from, I guess Brett Weinstein is probably the most principled and level-headed of the IDW set, and he's standing up for free speech. He's being very principled in that. I don't know to what degree his mode of politics works outside of. That's the thing. This whole liberal mode of politics works within. It's like playing chess. And you're just playing chess. You're not like, there's no guns under the table, and the table itself can't be flipped over, but the table's being flipped. And so that mode of politics, while I admire the people who want to maintain it, and I think that if they want to play, if I play their game out in my head, they'll kind of take a, well, is it the Benedict option? They'll kind of be marginalized, but hold the candle, like keep that fire burning, keep that place for that kind of discussion burning, and that kind of politic burning, and doing everything that they can to prove that it could work given all these other priors. But I don't see that mode of politic happening in this moment. And yet at the same time, I'm not particularly keen on total war. It's not going to be total war. There's not going to be a white riot. That's not how it's going to happen. It's not going to go hot. The people who are heavily armed, the most heavily armed contingent of this country, are not going to go around mowing every enemy down. They're going to be very patient. And there's that poem that was going around in the wake of the assassination about the anger of the Anglo-Saxon. And I think that was off base. I mean, it's this nice idea, like they just wanted to grill and now they're out there roaming around and enforcing some sort of martial law or going fascist, Patriot Front style. And apparently they're a real group. I think it was you who told me that they're a real group, or somebody in your domain. And I guess being a critic of the classical liberal and being the person who is trying to maintain the classical liberal procedural way of doing politics, which is I'm going to investigate, I'm going to question, I'm going to learn, I'm going to be open-minded, and I'm going to learn. And I'm able to do that for the reason that you brought up. I'm not allergic to the distasteful ideas on the right. I know where my morality is and where their morality is, and any attempt to guilt by association me doesn't really work. I mean, people have done that from the center, have tried to guilt by association me, because I've interviewed Daryl, or I've spoken to people, and every once in a while I'll pop off online about being a little bit more radical than on Twitter. I can play around with radicalism, but in real life, I'm not really radical. And the mode of my podcast is not really a radical podcast. But it's just interesting that they, the classical liberal set, maintain their allergy to inequality and to illiberalism, even when liberalism itself can't function without a illiberal basis, without a strong, they still have the operating system of the left. That's bigotry, that's racism, and you listed all the ideas that are coming out from the DR. There's more than one way to be aware of group difference. There's more than one way of just being aware and then taking that into account when you're organizing society. You don't have to oppress people. You can just calibrate society so that their abilities and desires aren't spilling over and corrupting everybody else's abilities and desires.
Well, I mean, like there's a great example of, so let's take that premise that any recognition of difference on any group will automatically lead to oppression. Okay. So let's say you recognize that for whatever reason, some groups are less apt at, let's just say, like data and analytics, right? The kind of office job stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
did you say autist job or office job?
Office job, but we'll go with both, right? It could be either. The sort of things that now are how middle class people secure their middle class existence, right? Email jobs. Mm-hmm. Okay, if you say no, they're not. There's not. But that is the only game in town, right? That is the only way in which you can live a decent moral existence. Mm-hmm. Right? Well, okay, you're basically either locking those people out of a decent wage, saying, no, that's the only, they're going to have to conform. Or alternately saying, well, we're going to make them do that. So we're going to sort of ruin the system, right? We're going to put them in through affirmative action or whatever. Or alternately say like, yeah, okay, not everyone is capable of doing this, but you should be able to, work as a janitor, work in a warehouse, work in a factory and still have a decent living. Say that, look, like we recognize that to some, much is given, much is expected. To other groups, and do not assume I'm only speaking in racial terms.
Racial terms, yeah.
Not.
Yeah.
But in any group, there are different aptitudes. And if you realize that there are different skill levels in any case, then, well, that could be managed, right? You can have a society where those are not dooming you to one thing or another. It can be beneficially
managed, but you have to recognize
100%. And that's just one way to look at it. Similarly, right, you see this perhaps most cleanly with men and women, that you have this sort of like awful situation where in order for men and women to be the same, both men and women have to be just universally miserable, right? Men can't be real men. Women have to dress up as kind of like bargain bin fake men in the workplace, and everyone's just unhappy with each other all the time. Where if we could just step back and say, okay, there's boy stuff and girl stuff, and maybe there's a little bit of a fuzzy barrier for guys who, are a little more feminine, women who are a little more masculine, but they don't have to be exactly the same. And we could just stop, having this kind of like boil in society that we've been picking at constantly. The idea that any recognition of difference leads to oppression is absurd. So let's talk about, where do I see these people? You mentioned that. Do they adopt the Benedict option? I mean, honestly, I think that part of it is a personality trait. There are certain people who are, for whatever reason, led to existing like that, thinking like that. And fair enough. So they may always be around. But I think the problem is, as you've said, fundamentally, sitting on the sidelines and saying, wait, both you guys are playing the game wrong. Mm-hmm. You can do that till you're blue in the face, but what effect does that have?
Yeah,
not much of one. I see that tendency decreasing in relevance. And to your earlier point about liberalism requiring an illiberal substrate, an illiberal soil from which
or
to
pre-liberal, perhaps. I don't know.
That's maybe a better way to say it, right? Pre-liberal. Yeah. That's very accurate. This is something that Moldbug accurately said about libertarians. I might have mentioned this before when we were talking. It's one of my favorite anecdotes to bring up, where he basically said, libertarians are incorrect because they think that the way that they act now as if they should act as if the libertarian paradise and Capistan is already here. So they should, just completely disregard all rules, be able to do whatever they want. He's like, that's wrong. You're acting as if it's already the case, but that will not lead you there. What you need is a fascist. And he's, joking, of course, right? He's speaking hyperbolically to get you to Ancapistan. You need someone to basically, smash all the cartels, so that when you and your buddies are at Burning Man, you all don't get thrown in a black van and ransomed on the dark web. Yeah. Again, speaking hyperbolically, but you need that kind of authoritarianism. This is something similar, I would say, with like parenting or schooling as well, where you need to instill a baseline of kind of like virtue and consequence before you can interact with your children as adults. So have you ever spoken to like homeschool kids before? Or maybe like in the 14 to 16 range, and you're like, oh my gosh, you're a little adult. Like, how are you this competent? And at least part of it is that their parents were incredibly involved in authoritarian early on. And obviously that tapers off. But in the same way in public education, you see a retreat from that, a desire to be incredibly like gentle and therapeutic with kids, acting as if they were already adults, has produced horribly malformed children. It doesn't get us where we want it to, merely by pretending as if it's already the case. I would say that's another problem with liberalism. Like, look, like I'm an Anglo. Liberalism is kind of our thing. It's how we want to live.
Yeah.
But the problem is, right, that depends on there being a sort of hidden authoritarianism, a wizard behind the curtain. It depends on there being, I mean, look at, early American history, where if you do something wrong, they cover you in tar and dump feathers on you and run you out of town. I mean, that's incredibly authoritarian. It is, incredibly harsh. And so to me, I have sympathy for those people. But I think that when Sam Francis called them beautiful losers, it was a great term. It was an ideological kill shot to sort of Abe Adams, because he's describing something very real. That, look, if you are playing the game beautifully, exactly as it's supposed to be played, but you're losing 10 out of 10 times, okay, sure. In times of relative moral consensus, it might be embarrassing to lose every time. You might not get what you want, but it doesn't matter, really. But in a time like ours, in a time where moderates like Charlie Kirk are exsanguinated live on television, a horrible death, mocked after the case. Well, the consequences of losing have gone up. They have increased. The game has become way, way riskier. And so deciding to make that trade-off and say, well, I'll play the beautiful game and run a 70%, an 80%, a 90% chance of losing. Well, that becomes much less attractive when the consequences for playing beautifully but losing are, in many cases, fatal. To your last point about, do I think people are going to go around and enact community justice? I think you're entirely correct there. I don't see that happening. It seems as if that inclination is not there. White conservative Americans don't set things on fire. It simply doesn't seem to be in their character, and maybe they're better for it. But as far as where this goes, I don't know. I think that the Trump administration has been playing a very dangerous game and has sort of danced with delegitimizing itself in the eyes of its own base. So first, obviously, the anti-war coalition was not all of MAGA, but it was a pretty big part of MAGA. That through line from the Tea Party, even earlier, right? The paleocons through the Tea Party up into the MAGA movement. Again, not all, but it's there. They were unhappy with Operation Midnight Hammer, or getting more and more unhappy, especially given what Trump has said previously about the war in Ukraine. Okay, so that's a certain part of it. Well, also, to be honest, the complete malfeasance of federal law enforcement, the inability to do anything, obviously in the case of these assassinations, but again, over and over again saying, we have proof that this guy committed treason. We have proof that, Russiagate was a giant scam.
Yeah.
And what are the consequences? Well, we made them feel bad in a strongly worded tweet. Okay, that's another part of it. But the Epstein thing, I think, is another very real part, that so many of the promises made, implicitly or explicitly, have been broken. And when you have that, when you have, like, wait a minute, we got our guy in, we did what we were supposed to do, and you got in, and what happened? We didn't change anything. So that sort of energy has been sort of capped off. It's not able to, release itself. And at the same time, you have ever increasing rhetoric elsewhere, like otherwise. So you have, wait a minute, why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing what you told you? I thought you were in charge. I thought you were the guy who was going to fix this. Wait a minute, they're killing us, literally. I don't know where that rage goes. I don't know where that anger goes. And again, it is scary. I would like to live in a society where politics was, as I said earlier, banned from the dinner table, where it was gross and icky and we don't talk about it. We don't need to be politicized. But again, that's not where we are. And when I see this increase in temperature, I don't know where it goes. Genuinely, I don't know, because I think you're right. I don't think this is going to be a civil war for any number of reasons. I don't think it's going to be a civil war. But how do you reconcile? How do you reconcile these mutually incompatible, these mutually exclusive stories, right? Moldbug called it the two-story state. Because previously, the way that was managed was, well, one side always won, ultimately. And so the conservatives, for generations, really, as long as there's been a conservative movement, just didn't really play the game that hard. They were playing something different. Their goal was to, shake their fist, sort of collect their reward for managing Red America, and then they'd still get invited to cocktail parties, right? They were the jobber in wrestling parlance. And guess what? Hulk Hogan and the Brooklyn Brawler, they drink beers afterwards, right? They don't hate each other. They're not really fighting. So that was how it went. And then once, depending on how you view it, either the left got tired of faking and wanted to actually bust some heads, or the right said, wait a minute, we actually want to win. Well, all of a sudden that turned into a real fight. My only thought, I'm sort of spitballing here, is that if this is going to be resolved, it's sort of either a King Solomon or a Alexander the Great sort of situation, right? Solomon obviously has the two mothers both saying the baby is theirs, and what does he do? Well, he makes a decisive decision. He says, you know what, we'll cut it in half. You'll each get half. And obviously the sort of humor in it is, of course, as soon as one woman says, no, whatever you want, please just don't hurt the baby, he's like, oh, that's the mother, she can have it. Or in the example of Alexander, the Gordian knot, right? This intractable problem. It's not that, dozens of men have tried and failed. And what does he do? Like Solomon, he takes out his sword and says, cut it in half, makes a decision. Look, maybe a Caesar is how we get out of this. That's traditionally how republics fall apart. They turn into dictatorships. I don't like that per se. That doesn't make me happy. That doesn't make me feel great. But again, if we accept the sort of political realism we've been talking about, we can look at how human organisms, human societies have evolved through time. It's not determinate, but we can see a pattern repeating over and over again that, hey, this is what happens. And maybe that's the way that this political question gets unraveled. That there's a guy who says, no, the buck stops with me. We're not doing this anymore. And I'm making a decision. And that decision may be cutting the baby in half. You don't get what you don't want, what you want. You don't get what you want, but I'm in charge. Or maybe it's, like the Gordian knot, simply saying like, all these problems are done. I'm ending it right now. I'm in charge. We don't do this anymore. And I don't say that in like a way, yeah, awesome. I can't wait for a dictatorship, for a Caesar. But ultimately, that seems to be where momentum is headed. And one of the other things I feel like is worth mentioning, is that the rate of change, right? How fast things are occurring is accelerating, right? It seems to be a sort of like parabolic curve. We're sort of racing ever faster and faster and faster. And so, look, man, like even things like political assassinations, if you would have asked me 2-3 years ago, like, hey, do you think you'll see political assassinations in your lifetime? You're like, yeah, probably. Like 10, 15 years. Like if this pressure keeps building, we might. But certainly not what we're now at 2 on Trump, Kirk, those poor lawmakers up in, was it Minnesota, I guess? Like this seems to be happening more and more. And so that pressure seems to be building. And look, I'm not going to sit here and say, I know the hour, I know when it all comes, crashing down. But unless like there is an off-ramp, there is a possibility that, we could have a leader who is not a dictatorial figure, but could say like, these need to be addressed. But it seems as if, going back to that, was it the flight 714, 713, that essay about, storming, the cockpit of the 9/11 hijackers, like the one last chance to write it. Well, if that didn't work, if we stormed the cockpit and nothing changed, well, what is the next logical conclusion? That either this keeps going on forever or something brings it to a punctuated stop. And I hope that I'm wrong. I genuinely do. I hope that Trump fixes it and we go back to being a normal country. But it seems as if that is not going to be the case. And in that case, right, if politics continues to be nasty until someone wins out, one, it's probably not going to be a particularly pleasant time to be in politics, right, as you or I are. But also, ultimately, I don't see how these beautiful losers survive. And I don't mean survive literally, like someone's going to come get them, but I don't understand how that voice, that tendency, sticks around. It seems to me that if present trends continue, that sort of feeling of being out of time, of speaking to a world that no longer exists, well, that gulf will widen. And in much the same way, you and I might roll our eyes about Grandpa, whining about socialists and Jimmy Carter at the dinner table.
Yeah.
Look, the times, they are a changing, as a guy who wrote a song once said.
Yeah, the boomer lifespan has been fascinating. I still meet there's the remnants of the greatest generation are still around every once in a while, and you meet somebody who was born in the 1920s or 30s even, who experienced the Great Depression. The amount of technological and economic transformation that this country has gone through has just been, how would you be able to live with that and not go crazy? Just how much you changed from like not having lights, to having lights, and just that. But I don't think it's as like all that technological progress over the last 120 years is less crazy making or less dizzying than the social progress that's happened in the boomers' lifespan. They went from the iconic 50s to the iconic 60s, 70s, 80s, and then 90s. They kind of like the system kind of just ran itself, and they got ready for retirement and finished off their work jobs, and now they're kind of coasting, and they have their big nest egg that they're deciding where to put it and what causes to love, and I can't. I wonder what they, I have parents, so I kind of know, what they see, their values, and how they respond to the events that are happening on a political level, which is interesting because my grandpa, he died in, oh man, it was probably 2009, I think it was. And, the last 10 years of his life, he spent watching Fox News and raving against the Islamists, and like kind of like, comfortable with his racism, and just didn't care about not hiding it, but just kind of really angry about politics all the time. And I thought it was unreasonable the way that he was seeing things in such stark terms, but like he went through World War II, so he had justification for those stark terms, and that myth of the World War II shaped the boomers generation. And has facilitated this divisiveness and this enemy making within. And, I'm watching my parents kind of worry about Trump and really hate Trump. And I'm like, well, he's basically a Clintonian Democrat. He's basically a 90s liberal. That's all he really wants. He uses these words, and he uses rhetoric. But if you actually like flip the switch in your head and hear his humor, then things are a lot different than you think about him, like the authoritarianism and stuff like that. He's actually kind of a different guy, and he's actually got a heart, under all those layers of narcissism and kayfabe. Like there's an operator that I think he's tuned in. I think he's moved by the Spirit because of how active he is, and not intentionally. I think God uses him. He's like one of those tools that for one reason or another. And I don't see how you look at the assassination last year, the attempted assassination, and not see, a little apocalypse about how reality's going. But the boomers are leaving the political stage, and what they're leaving us with, what Gen X is kind of partially inheriting, but I guess we're kind of just passing it on to the millennials in one way or another. It's a different landscape, and I don't think we have the tools to really understand it. And that's why I've intuitively sought out the dissidents, because they were unearthing these tools and these ways of looking at things which were closer to the game as it's going to be played if the left gets its way, and the left has got its way. But there's two there's two big questions. One is where the young people put their eggs, where the young men decide, what the young men decide on. And two is this competency crisis. The boomers, for all their faults, were very competent people. They, I think that they earned all of the wealth that they got. I mean, it was a very particular social and historical situation, but they worked really hard. They had the American value of working really hard. And they inherited an attention span and a work ethic that gave them a lot of competency. And I think part of why the left is going insane is because they're losing competency at a rapid rate. What happened in the with higher education over the last 15 years, Evergreen being a particularly condensed case study of it, is that the boomers kind of waited out the conservative older people and started replacing people of like mind, and then started replacing people that were more and more radical and less competent at the same time. Because for one reason or another, that cathedral of equality produced incompetence in its iterations. And equity is just an incompetent equality, but there's something in the roots of equality that undermine meritocracy. And the liberals want to champion meritocracy, but real meritocracy is going to be hard to stomach. It's going to be really hard to stomach because we're racially conscious now, thanks to the left. We're hyper racially and I can't turn on Amazon. They started putting commercials and see, okay, every white guy is the schlub. Every hero is a black woman, like over and over and over again. The black woman is the hero of all these commercials, like this DEI thing. And I'm cursed by DEI to see like the DEI happening, and all that stuff. So, the promises that are made to the younger, radicals on the left, that you can goon out and you can find meaning at the same time. It's not going to come true. All that you are the soft, squishy center around which the entire world operates. It's not really true. You could be that way. The world could revolve around you. But the path there isn't just raw power, it's actual competence. And so whichever political group can inspire the young and capture the competent will win in the long term. I think that what you were bringing up about Trump just not being able to release the Epstein files or do all this stuff, it's because the ship is manned by tons of incompetent people. No matter who's in charge, these things are not going to change. The Epstein files are just not going to come out. Israel is just going to have a tremendous influence on America as it is. And you could rail against it and talk about it and get in trouble for talking about it, even pointing it out, even in a value-free analysis saying, why does this one country have so much weight over my country? Why do I care about these countries over there? You can ask those questions, but the thing is that they, like that long march through the institutions, these things are already, the momentum is already in place for these things to act out. Breaking from the system and actually what the basket weaving people are doing is, and I think Exit is another group in your sphere, is just, okay, where are the competent people and how do we direct their competence in a constructive direction? And politics, I think, with very few exceptions, I think Aaron is pretty good at it. And a few other people that are more popular than Aaron. Politics is kind of a waste of time. Even the talk about it's kind of a waste of time. Maybe I see a little disagreement, so I want to hear your answer to it. I think politics should be tithed, but not be the basis of the direction in which the energy and the competence needs to go. There needs to be a little bit of politics and political awareness, and the ideas need to spread and be discussed, but the actual competence that is going to resurrect and create the next America needs to be concerned with actual things that they can have power and ownership and produce and be productive in.
Yeah, so several things there. I'm going to say something which is going to sound very woke TM. And this maybe is a feature of, like you said, DEI is sort of forced into your brain and rewires you. But there is a sense in which if you are in one of the marginalized groups, if you are in one of the groups that power doesn't like, you sort of become political by default. If everyone is saying, every job application, every application to university, by simply virtue of being that and saying, like, I don't really see a problem with how I am, that's going to push you to a political direction. But to your point about the competency crisis, I think you're entirely correct. And this is another part of the reason why I've hitched my horse to this wagon, where I've said, I see something here that's incredibly exciting. So we talked earlier about the information advantage, the ability to predict and diagnose things more accurately than others. But one of the other incredible blessings is, as the Germans would say, the Menschenmaterial, right? The actual competence, the people there, the guys. Because many of those guys have been told, sensitive young men need not apply, right? Keep moving. This is a DEI neighborhood. You can imagine the sign. And I experienced this even, 5-6 years ago in college, that it was like, wait a minute, when I go to apply to a college, I can meet all the requirements on paper, but you're not getting in. You have to go to a place that's 2 or 3 notches down. And obviously where you go to college doesn't really matter. It was I would argue in my experience, education was largely a waste of time, but nonetheless, right? That's an example. Well, when I got into the workplace afterwards, I couldn't get a job anywhere. I literally applied to 500 or 600 jobs and gotten responses to half a dozen. And look, I'm not going to say that's all discrimination, because I think a large part of it has to do with AI. It has to do with, the way that HR is run by generally the most incompetent fools, I'll use that term, on the planet. And I'll also say this isn't just young men. I've heard this from many people in an older demographic, the kind of 45 to 65 age. Or not 65, but the kind of like the latter 10 to 20 years of your career, where if you get let go, you're not getting hired again, because no one wants the, stale and pale demographic anymore. You're out. We can replace you. But where do those guys go? Well, a lot of them end up in right-wing political circles, because again, it's sort of the negative pressure vacuum, right? The pressure vacuum, right? It is the pull to the push coming from everywhere else. But also you have this kind of containment zone where all of these guys who are, not all, but many of them are competent. They're obviously smart guys, and they're all sitting around together, and many of them can't, for any number of reasons, find a job kind of appropriate to their station. They can't find something that they're interested in doing, or they can't find anything at all. They feel as if like, hey, I'm kind of locked out. I feel like I can't rise to the position I'd like to be in. Well, I mean, that's another incredible resource in and of itself, a genuine human resource. So you have both an information advantage. You have ideas that are not being accurately discussed elsewhere, signs that the tea leaves are not being correctly interpreted. So that's an advantage in and of itself. But also you have a human advantage. You have people who are competent, who in a meritocracy would do quite well for themselves, who have, in many cases, due to no fault of their own, either for demographic reasons or for political crimes, right? They have been canceled. They can't do that anymore. They can't go to work and kind of plug into the system. And that's incredibly exciting. So for instance, I'll give you an example. I've been now to 3 subsequent Old Glory Club conferences, right? I went to the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. And the ratio of what I would consider like hitters to spurgs, the guys who were like, oh, wow, this is a great guy. He's going places, to guys who were fine enough, but are kind of the people you'd expect to meet at a political conference, right? They're sort of odd ducks. Well, it's getting better every time, and not just getting better, but like a lot better. So at the last one, and this was before I'd face docs, so I had a certain amount of anonymity. I could just walk around and listen to people, which is kind of weird to do and weirder to admit, but you're kind of interesting. Like, who are the kind of people that are here? And I'm listening to and meeting people where it's like, oh, you're working at, I won't say, but a big tech company. you're making a lot of money. You could be somewhere else. This is dangerous for you to be here. But you say these guys are interested. They're right. They're pointing out something well. Or alternately, I think of the Shenandoah. I probably shouldn't say that. I was thinking of a organization of some group. Could you edit that out? Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, my bad. I got going. And the founding members of that group, of them, the vast majority is small business owners, and not just like, someone owns a gas station or something, but like genuine small businessmen. And again, these are people with something to lose, something to risk. They could lose a lot, but they're saying, this is important to me. Mm-hmm. These ideas, these people are the ones I want to be associated with. So what do you have when you have both a group of interesting ideas and a group of competent, capable, energized young men locked out of power? Well, if you're looking for something new, if you're looking for a new votive spark, if you're looking for something that's like, hey, this is where something could come from. I'm not going to say it's 100%, but if you're looking to bet on something, it's a whole lot better than betting on another term of Trump or another JD Vance or something like that. Like there's something alive and interesting there.
Okay. I have to revise my statement about politics being a waste of time. There are certain types of politics that are a waste of time. And there are certain types of politics that aren't, and that are actually necessary. And there's a certain amount of energy that is released when action is called for. And a certain demographic has been historically known to act when the call sounds. And so capturing those guys, and they're not idiots, they're not fools. And that's the other major misstep that I see podcasters in the IDW set making, is that they are really not keyed into who exactly these Anons are. And the Anons are hiding their power level because they had to. And what I see in talking with a lot of the dissident right people is reluctant illiberals, reluctant post-liberals. They would rather be liberal. They would rather grill. They don't want authority for authority's sake. They want authority because they have certain values that the world is unwilling to allow them to manifest. And so they're going to step up in order to make things work.
So to provide you an example to that, I was having a conversation with a guy who I will introduce to you at some point in the future, who's very successful, done a lot with his life. And we're good friends. He's interested in my form of politics. And routinely, when we're on the phone, he'll say something like, I just can't believe I'm interested in politics right now. Like, I shouldn't have to care about this. I should be focused on being a successful entrepreneur, or I should be focused on, four-wheel drive vehicles from the 80s or something like that. Like what I actually care about, something I'm passionate about. Similarly, like I'll be honest, I should be caring about, like, I don't know, trains or like random like GWatt optics or other things that I like am sort of neurochemically interested in.
Yeah, fulfill your like Tylenol receptors.
Yeah, 100%. By the way, have you heard about the birth of the phrase Tylenol Americans to describe the intellectually disadvantaged? If you ever doubt that in the arms race between words that will get you thrown out of your job and people coming up with new terms to describe different groups, the posters are always going to win. But in all seriousness, I think that you're astutely pointing out something. That look, I think there's a part of it that, like, even before I was interested in politics, I was interested in literature. I liked reading. I liked discussing ideas. But you can do that in a very non-political way, right? Like my passion is like 20th century novels. Like I could talk to you about, I don't know, Steinbeck for an hour and not really get into anything political about it. And I think that a lot of people are perhaps more bookish by inclination. Like you said earlier about gamers, they're people interested in how systems work. But there are many non-political ways to manifest that. And I think that sort of reluctance is something that you're accurately portraying. It's like genuinely, when I express that sentiment of I wish politics would go back to being something that you didn't discuss in polite society, I see that elsewhere. And even in Gamergate, right? What was the resounding cry? Keep politics out of video games. games, right? Keep this out of my entertainment. And look, the lefties are right when they say everything is political. But, and this is a big one, normally in sort of a healthy society, there's a baseline level of consensus that most things are not up for debate. Okay, go back to kind of the early Americas. Well, you might be a Methodist, or even worse, a godless Quaker, and I might be a good Presbyterian Scotch-Irish boy. And okay, we have that. That is a difference. We might have different views. We might have different cultures. But regardless of what you believe in your heart of hearts, Christianity is the baseline assumed religion. That is not up for debate. You don't necessarily have to be particularly devout, but there are blasphemy laws. You couldn't at the time walk into the Trading Post and say, I try not to be blasphemous, but whatever, impugn the honor of Mary or whatever people get upset about. That was apolitical. That was off the table. And slowly, the way that the left won was by increasing the scope of politics, right? It was by taking more things out of the sort of implicit cultural realm. So, for instance, feminism is a great example. Taking the family from being a solid unified unit, right? Men who did exist occasionally in the political world, women who did not, they were unified together. And by breaking them, by mediating that bond, by not only saying both men and women are political entities, but by creating a system of power to mediate, to decide. And we know as good Schmittians that decision determines authority, your ability to decide. Well, you've politicized that. And you can follow that exact same thing of taking bonds which were implicit, which were apolitical, pre-political, one might even say, and dragging them into the political realm. It increases your power because all of a sudden there's a new way for you to decide, for you to swing your might around. And also, let's be honest, on the back end, it gives you a bunch of jobs to stick your friends in. Every HR department in the world is like an outpost of progressivism. It's an easy example to hand. But again, when we're talking about what is the goal? Sure, yeah, is this authoritarianism from the perspective of liberalism, authoritarian and scary? 100%. But what we're basically saying is we want to go back to a world that is pre-political, to a world where all of these things are not up for debate. They are not up for a political win and loss, right? To return to, and look, I want to say this again. That does not mean politics goes away. If we go back to Aristotle, who I've mentioned before, man is a political animal. It is how we operate and how we work. But the scope of politics can be radically changed. Right? We don't have to live like this, as the refrain goes. We don't have to make every interaction between every possible subgroup, between first social classes, then men and women, then racial groups. We don't have to let those interactions be part of politics. Things can simply be off the table. But what does that require? As we've said over and over again, ultimately it requires an authoritarian, maybe not constant authoritarians, but it requires a reset. That will definitely trigger the anti-woke types. I'm not talking about a great reset at all. What I'm saying is it requires the rules of the game to be adjusted, to say, no. Politics is not everything. It's this. This is what we can talk about. This is what we can disagree about. It requires, if you can imagine going back, well, you can't run everywhere in the school. You can run on the playground, right? It requires limiting that because otherwise the school becomes a racetrack. Everything is dragged down into that. And that's what we've seen, right? And I think I've mentioned this before that, if you look at Gen Z, and I assume this trend will continue with Gen Alpha, incredibly minor things about you are politicized. All of these little tiny signifiers are built and kind of point out that you are, you've got a star on your belly or you don't, or you're a fascist or you're a communist.
Yeah. It's become a fashion statement.
100%. And in ways,
or a class statement rather. Yeah.
Right. And in ways, I'll be honest, I don't really understand. I'm slightly too old to get all of it, but I see it. And either the conclusion is, well, it would be mean to say that has to stop. It would be mean to say that we need to readjust the rules of the game and restrict politics. Okay, if we accept that premise, then it just goes on forever, right? And everything becomes political and this is just a hellscape. And, everyone's grandparents go insane talking about Donald Trump or lizard people. Or we might have to accept that and I say this as someone who is very unlikely to ever, if my prediction comes true, have any bearing in how things turn out, realize that, hey, politics maybe isn't for everyone. That not everything, not every person, not every situation needs to be brought into the political arena. And to be honest, man, if I could wave a wand and I didn't have to care about politics, I'll be honest, you'd never see me upload another episode. Or maybe you would. I'd just be talking about like random nonsense no one else cares about. Yeah. But it would require, we have to understand that there's a give and take, right? You're giving something up. And what you might have to give up to depoliticize the world is your say, or at least your nominal say. Because look at the feudal world. Like, did the peasants live a political existence? Not really. I mean, did the king go down and say, hey, what do you guys want to do? I'm sure that maybe it happened once or twice, but they didn't care what was happening in the king's court. It was incredibly far away to them. Sure, they may have been swept up, and if there was a war, may have been levied. That still happens now, right? It's not like we've dodged that. But in their day-to-day life, there was no women's issues. There was no like female voting block or male voting block. It was apolitical. It didn't matter. And look, I understand that may require me to surrender certain of my nominal rights. I understand that. But it seems as if we hold on to that too tightly, we say that is inviolable. Well, the system will continue to degenerate. If everyone gets to be a political actor all the time, well, in that case, we're doomed to this kind of spiral out of control.
Yeah.
And again, I'm sort of out over my skis. I'm kind of hypothesizing here. This is one way I see this wrapping up, but I'm curious, and I'd be genuinely very curious if you could offer people that sort of deal with the devil, to basically say, look, you don't get to vote. You're not going to be asked about anything, but you don't have to live in hell world politics, right? You don't have to, be upset about, the Black national anthem at the NFL season opener, or you don't have to be upset about Sydney Sweeney's, newest American Eagle ad, whatever the slop story of the day is. You don't have to care. You don't have to be involved in that. And oftentimes the sort of stated objection will be, well, that would lead to tyranny. That would be horrible. You would be, your head would be on a spike. One, I would encourage those people to read Hans Hermann Hoppe, Libertarian, I Am Not, but Democracy, the God That Fails, because he digs into that. He says, let's look at the purported advantages of democracy. How do those check out? He comes out, despite being a libertarian, as a monarchist, which is kind of a funny thing. He says, on average, you are much freer under an absolute ruler than a democracy. So
yeah, if you just look at the tax rate,
literally true, literally true. But again, I think that
the emotion, like financial taxes, and then also the cognitive tax that politics takes.
No, 100%. And one of the other difficult things is, if we look at, say, we decide we still want to keep sort of an earlier version of our political system, go back to, a real representative democracy, representative republic, and simply trim the fat, get rid of, people being bribed with welfare, get rid of, mass immigration, get rid of all those things. Fair enough. But we've got to understand that, like any system, it is ultimately exploitable. There are sort of flaws built into it. And one of the flaws built into democracy, in much the same way that we've talked about the problem with beautiful losers or playing chess with a gun under the table, is that game has been solved. And if you're playing democracy and you want to win, well, why don't you start making a wedge issue? Why don't you start playing identity politics, as we've heard it said? Mm-hmm. Well, there's no reason not to, because that's how you win. And ultimately, it is degenerative, right? That if it works at, let's just say, 101% speed, it sure as hell works at 150. And that leads, as we've seen, right, to this kind of like war of like where everything is political, right? Where even your decision to, like the fact that I got married in my early 20s was a sign that I was a political extremist. And look, they happen to be right. That was an accurate prediction, but people look at me askance without me even opening my mouth and saying that I think democracy is a failure and we should have a dictatorial strongman, and we should all be peasants, which is exactly what I've been arguing for this entire time.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the transformation or the depoliticization of America would create a huge gap, because what are people going to think about? How are people going to write any miniseries on TV if it's not political? Like how it's become so ingrained in what we pay attention to and what we look for, what excites us, what draws our attention, and then captures our attention and maintains our attention. And to hypothesize about a depoliticized, apolitical America, I think that the boomers were swept up in that, because they came of age watching TV, and most of that TV was, cowboys and maybe some Star Trek or Twilight Zone, like these fictional experiences that were just playing around with reality, asking more philosophical questions. But then they're coming at, when they're growing up, the Vietnam War happens, and then new media happens on top of that. And a lot of their identity as a group was formed through protest. And I think this is probably just a problem of being Western, is that we politicize everything. And if it's not politics, then it's religion. We have this addiction to meaning as a social tug of war. I think it's just part of who we are and how we create meaning.
That's actually a very important thing you mentioned. The way in which religion has replaced, or politics has replaced religion. It's actually a very deliberate thing by the classical liberals. And you kind of can't blame them for it, right? You look at the 30 Years' War, all of the wars during the Reformation, and these were incredibly brutal. A non-negligible part of the German population died within a few decades because of these wars. And so given that, you're like, all right, well, shoot, man, religion, that very, very nasty thing to organize society along in recent history. You can understand the inclination to say, you know what, believe whatever you want in the privacy of your own home. We're all generally Christian. And instead, you a Protestant, me a Catholic, together we can meet in the marketplace and trade and understand that, politics should not be fought along those lines. So it's fair enough, right? Given the amount of data they had at the time, reasonable assumption. I don't blame them for making that decision. But the problem is replacing religion with politics. Oh boy, you thought that was bad.
Yeah.
Obviously, the 20th century is the century of ideology, just kind of the high watermark of politics as religion. Mm-hmm. And it's the bloodiest century in human history. Pick your poison. Any dictator at a certain point after X number of million, it's just a lot of dead people. It's horrific. And I think that this is really an interesting thing as well, if we're looking for something sort of depoliticized. I think that the new atheist movement that we mentioned earlier, it saw itself as the ultimate kind of extension point, that this would continue on forever, that, as James Lindsay wrote in 2013 in his book, Everyone is Wrong About God, right? This is how society was going to exist, right? Religious people were steadily going to diminish to a vanishing point, and we would be enlightened, irreligious people. Well, one, they were completely wrong. They were sort of the peak, right? That was as irreligious as the West was going to be. We've seen that in the data, right? That at least in the UK, right, young men are returning to church. Yeah, it's just true in America as well.
Yeah.
And look, if people are returning to church in their 20s, they're very unlikely to lose that throughout their life. Generally, you get more religious as you age. But also, it seems as if atheism has run its course. There were very few atheists around, if you've noticed. There's still people who don't believe in God. But out and out atheists are very much in the minority. Now, at least part of that is that they sort of memed themselves into irrelevance. They were so irritating and embarrassing that even people who agreed with them were like, stop it, go away. Yeah. There's a post about this that basically said, there's no evangelist as great as the guy who made up the tipping fedora meme, right? He
Yeah.
saved more souls than St. Paul or
that professional quote maker. Today I am enlightened by my own intelligence. Today I'm euphoric. That guy.
Yeah, exactly. But in all seriousness, if we assume that that has sort of reached its high water mark, that religion is coming back, and look, religion means many different things. It is not simply a binary, you are religious or not. There's obviously very real differences.
Yeah.
But to me, when I look at something that was as ecumenical as the death of Charlie Kirk, and this might be, I might be smoking the hopium. I probably am, but I like to at least delude myself that something nice could happen. That's a possibility of saying like, oh, hey, look, we can have a new system of values, which is broadly Christian.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That obviously those people have very strong differences between, the Catholics and the crazy evangelical Protestants like me or whatever. Mm-hmm. They might have disagreements, but they can come together and say, this is sort of the acceptable range of debate, right? That we agree that a certain level of Christian values ought to be culturally preeminent, and anything else will agree to disagree. Not an ultimately stable solution, right? Multicultural societies don't tend to be, but it's a hell of a lot better than what we've got. That's something, and it might be a Band-Aid, who knows? But I saw something there that has potential. Like, okay, this is something we could pursue, which again might has a potential to be depoliticizing.
Or just be the domain in which politics operates itself. I mean, I don't think you can take the politics out of religion or the religion out of politics. Man is a religious being just as much as a political beast. But the breadth of human opportunity and potential is much more capped in politics than in religion. You can't. If you look to politics to tell you what a man is and what a woman is, like you'll get Brown, the Supreme Court justice, ask a scientist. And even our political system cannot define man and woman. It never thought to define man and woman, and now we're arguing over what a man and a woman is, because in these documents it doesn't express these truths. You have to look to a religion to express the truth of a man and a woman, and you can incorporate science to a certain degree, but you're not going to find the essence of woman in that she is the part of the species that carries the large gamete, and man is the one that possesses the small gamete. Like, actually, there's this huge scaffolding around which personalities dwell and live. What are you going to say?
Well, actually, I think that you're onto something there, and really, what the role of religion is to set the boundaries of the sacred, right? What is off limits, the sort of limiting factors. And obviously we understand that in every society, men have been wicked. They've done things that they were not supposed to. But in general, when we look at a society, there are taboos. There are things which are seen to be beyond the pale. For example, in ancient Greek society, killing a guest, right? Someone who came to you for hospitality, was beyond the pale. Did people do it? Of course they did. Humans are sinful and awful and do nasty things to each other. But it was seen as being something that wasn't done. And so one of the things that I think we're identifying is that the previous civic order, maybe the civic religion of the boomers, has sort of lost its potency, has lost its ability to set the boundaries of the sacred, what is illegitimate to discuss and what is. And ultimately the fight being fought now is over who comes next, who gets to say what the acceptable bounds of play are. And when you look at Kirk's funeral, that's giving you one side, right? Those are people who have many disagreements, and within that group, there's politics, certainly, but they are saying certain things are out. Certain things are not to be discussed. And I think that is ultimately, honestly, part of the reason why you see so much edgy signaling on the dissident right, for example, is basically saying, like, we are not part of that system of values anymore. We will violate their taboos. We don't care. I think that's part of it. But I think ultimately what we're talking about is sort of a new civic religion. And you're right that religion and politics are mixed, because, well, what does the politics do? Well, that's the daily grind part, what actually happens, the bills or whatever. But the religious part is basically saying, one, how do you justify things, right? Yeah, why is another part of it. But also, what is off the table? What's unacceptable? So, for instance, even now in kind of a radically diminished version of the civic religion, if footage came out of Joe Biden dropping the hard R, right, saying the gamer word, he'd be done. He violated a taboo. Maybe, I mean, given the fact that his brain was dripping out his ears, they would have kept him around, but that would be a seismic moment, right? That would be seen as breaking something major. And Trump certainly has broken taboos. And I think that's how we can see that religion is coming to its end, that it no longer has the ability to strike you dead if you wander into the Holy of Holies. It no longer has the ability to enforce those taboos universally. But ultimately, maybe that's the answer, that religion needs to take a much wider role in the sense of setting things as taboos, right? Of restricting the scope of politics. And look, ultimately, we understand as realists, every system degenerates. There is no perfect permanent system. Everything ultimately comes down and is corrupted. Such is the nature of man, such is the nature of existence. But I think we can also say, one, things aren't going so well. And if current trends continue, things will get worse than I'd like to live in. Maybe I have to. Maybe that's just how the cookie crumbles. But given, the amount of agency I and others like me have, I'd like to avoid that, right? If possible. And so, again, I think that's why so many people who look at politics and say, I don't want to do this. I mean, even Musk, who I'm not a big fan of Musk, but he seemed to be a reluctant entrant into the political arena, are saying look, in order for things to, in order to avoid something nasty happening, I might have to get my hands dirty.
Yeah.
I might have to do something kind of gross and lame and annoying. And again, if you're looking on places to bet, if you're looking on where to put your money, young, competent, highly energetic men it's not a bad place to sort of put your resources. But sorry, I'm rambling a little bit.
No. We should wrap up. I have to mosey, but I think that I keep on talking to this group. I don't know if they listen to me at all. I poke at them on Twitter because they're my people. But the classical liberals deeply misunderstand the dissident right. They see the game of power, and anybody who takes up the one ring is just going to be corrupted. They don't really, they keep on vacillating between World War II and Lord of the Rings to make their point, whereas the dissident right is dipping into stormtroopers and shit. So the dissident right is just like
there's a lot of World War II and
yes,
and Lord of the Rings, but we mean it in a different way.
Yeah, there's that. It's kind of a cliche. It's not really true at all, but it kind of rings true that you want to find the person. You want to give the crown to the person who doesn't want it, like the reluctant tyrant, or the reluctant authoritarian rather than tyrant, the reluctant dictator. And I really think that the classical liberals misunderstand the dissident right because they're willing to accept the rules of the game, and they're willing to analyze power. And like even Rufo, you cannot call Rufo a tyrant, but he's becoming more and more based. And I'm really enjoying his plot arc because no, we want to win. Our job is to win and not lose. And what we're going to do is demolish the enemy and take power, and then reconstitute the systems and institutions in our image. And, he's more of a centrist, and he's more kind of in line with the Kirkian way of politicking and stuff. But the dissident right, they're honest about things. And memes aside, maybe I'm wrong, but they're, like I said, like when the woke right fervor was at its peak, thankfully it's kind of diminished because it's so ridiculous, and it kind of was wrong out the get-go. But I'm like, okay, if we had a woke right Portland, Oregon, would you rather live there than a woke left Portland, Oregon? Like, just imagine a city that's woke right.
Even
so-called,
even as assuming the kind of value system of the left wing, right? It's like, okay, we saw what woke left Portland looked like,
Yeah.
which is like black teenagers getting shot and no one is jailed for it because it happened at a deregulated zone. It's like, okay, well, you don't even have to be particularly concerned about, like woke concepts of like social justice to say that's not good. That should not occur. And I spoke with Kevin Dolan of the Exit Group not long ago, and he made exactly this point, that the woke right, the woke left are not the same. And a big part of that is, look, both of them do reject liberalism. That is true. There's that sort of symmetry. But the woke left genuinely hates, in a way that I don't see many on the woke right. Obviously, there are crazy people, there are lunatics, but I consider that to be a minority. And when I say they don't hate, I don't mean that they're not angered by things.
Yeah.
But like, to your point, woke right Portland, for whatever that looks like, is better for everyone. Saying, no, you're not allowed to smoke fentanyl or crocodile or do whatever degenerate drugs you want to do in a tent city. That produces a better thing even for those drug addicts. And so when we're talking about rejecting...
Even the black community would be heavily policed, and it would be better for the black community.
And so when we talk about, like, what have they learned, the conservative movement learned from the woke right, that moral rejection, that saying, no, we will lead to a better world. We will not let you make everyone miserable. Even if the people you're making miserable are your people, we won't stand for that. I think it's a very exciting thing to see, that sort of moral confidence in that. But again, Benjamin, sorry, I know I've taken up a ton of your time. I think this is one of the longest podcast episodes I've ever done.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Man.
You're such an easy guy to talk to, and you're really doing the work that you're meant to be doing. What's coming up for you? And where can people find you? What do you basically produce? Pitch me, and let's send people over to your show.
So my primary output is The Jay Burden Show. You can find me on Apple, Spotify, YouTube. It's an interview show. It's a little bit shorter than yours, Ben. It's about an hour. But I talk to interesting people really across the spectrum. Just recently, I've had famous libertarian Tom Woods on. Other people, Kevin Dolan. Actually, that's a great episode to check out because we talk about something that we just mentioned. But a lot of other of our mutual friends. I had Benjamin on not too long ago. But like I said, any podcast platform, you can check me out there. And again, thank you so much for having me, man. This was a great conversation.
Is there anything coming up for you, like something you're working toward, or a series, or a book, or writing,
if you're up for it, I've been working on a very long series with my buddy Thomas about the history of occultism, which has been kind of interesting.
Oh, cool.
So we've been going through, for instance, like the Son of Sam case. Other prominent examples, we start with the Satanic Panic and kind of work out from that. But you can check the Sagebrush Institute, which is a conservation website run by Braxton McCoy, a personal friend of mine who was on Tucker not too long ago. You can check their Substack for a new op-ed by yours truly. Also, you can find my writing on Substack, Jay Burden or the Old Glory Club. I try to put something out 2 or 3 times a month. Like I said earlier, I am a thoroughly serviceable writer. But if you're interested, they're free, so it's not like you have to pay me for the privilege.
Yeah, right. Well, Jay, you're an awesome fellow. Thank you very much for swinging by, and we'll get you back on before too long.
All right. Appreciate it, Ben. Thank you.
Cheers.